Hey guys, we're back with BioLayne Video Log number 20. And in this video log, I want to talk about, I kind of touched on it in the bodybuilding and fitness industry extremism video log. I want to talk about reactionary kind of subgroups in the bodybuilding and fitness industry. And for example, you've seen this with like clean eating versus IIFYM. IIFYM is kind of like the reactionary well, I wouldn't say that necessarily. I think some people who do IIFYM do it very reasonably, and it's not about just how much junk food I can eat and fit it into my numbers. It's about, okay, if I have a little bit of junk food, it's not a big deal as long as it's in my numbers and I hit everything else. But you also look at like meal frequency. For a long time it was the eat 8 meals a day, and then you had kind of the reactionary intermittent fasting. And so it's like whenever there's kind of one established way to do things, there's always also kind of like a reactionary thing that comes along, and it's kind of easy to sell that reactionary point just from being extreme. That's not to say that there aren't certain benefits to something on the other side of the spectrum, but like I talked about, typically the truth is in the middle. I want to talk about things that I kind of feel like I'm a little bit responsible for, not fully, but part of it. I've been seeing, and Matt Jansen and I, who's another coach, we were talking at a show recently, and we were talking about how, because of some of my video logs, people kind of have this impression that I don't diet people, right? And that nobody who diets with me ever feels bad. And that's completely wrong. Other people say, oh yeah, don't do caloric restriction. Layne says not to do caloric restriction. No. I say don't do starvation, don't do super low calorie, and don't do it in a way interspersed with binging and, crazy like short-term overfeeding that leads to metabolic adaptation where you have a hard time losing weight and you still put on a lot of weight. That's what I'm talking about. Caloric restriction, you have to calorically restrict if you want to lose body fat. Now the problem with that is people, and I talked about this kind of in the carbohydrate metabolism video log, people think of your carb intake level as a static thing. And in reality, it can move, in some cases quite a bit. So your caloric restriction level, what you need to restrict, how much you need to restrict, is not a set amount. If you've had some bad coaching, you've been super restricted, you've gone through some of the things I've talked about, you may get to the point where you need 1,000 calories or under to even like make the scale budge with a lot of exercise. But does that mean you will always be like that? No. That stuff is reversible, and if you reverse diet correctly, you do some of the things I talked about, where you don't compete for a long time, you take time off, you slowly reverse diet, add calories, take advantage of the metabolic adaptation in the other direction, raising calories. Then maybe, if you get to the point where you're up to, 2,500 calories a day, maintaining your weight, well, now a caloric restriction level in order to lose body fat is 2,000 calories instead of 1,000. Okay, because you've worked on that over time. So you still need caloric restriction if you're going to get real lean. But the amount of restriction that you require, the actual calorie level you require to achieve that restriction can change. So I think that's a really important point to emphasize. And same thing with people say, well, I feel real bad and I'm so tired. And, I shouldn't feel like this during a contest prep. Layne said it, I shouldn't feel like this. No, I mean, if you get lean enough, you're going to have some side effects. I mean, it's not necessarily dangerous, but you're going to be more tired. You're going to have hunger. You will, be more lethargic. Sex drive may drop, those sorts of things. That's a normal kind of reaction to dieting. Now, when those things go to the extreme is when it's a problem. And people will say, don't calorically restrict, or, that sort of thing, or, they're kind of talking, they're like, don't suffer, you don't suffer. Well, at a certain point, you probably are going to suffer a little bit in contest prep in terms of just, you know, you're going to have to do, you know, more exercise or lower calories, lower than what you were in the off season. I'm not saying, you know, 1,000 calories. We all talked about how I don't like that. But, you know, you're going to have to be restricted. And at certain points, certain days, that'll probably suck. But I think the difference is, what I talk about is I'm okay with, you know, sacrificing for the sake of reaching an end goal. Okay? What I'm not okay with is suffering for the sake of suffering just so you can say, oh, I suffered so much. And you can act morally superior to somebody else. And I see that all the time. Oh yeah, I post on Instagram or Twitter or whatever. I'm going back for my 3rd cardio session, hour a day. You know, 3 hours a day. I'm eating 800 calories, you know. And it's almost like it's like a badge of honor. And it's like, well, no, that's not, you know, that's just stupid. You know, there is a point to working smarter, not harder. And so that's what I'm trying to get people to avoid, that suffering for the sake of suffering. You know, do you want to brag about suffering the most, or do you want to brag about looking your best? I mean, you know, they're different things. And so that's what I really want to try and emphasize. Yes, there's going to be certain points where contest prep sucks or dieting sucks. You know, even me, you know, when I diet down, when I get to a certain point, I don't feel real great, you know. But I also realize I'm not going to do that forever. The other thing is, people say, well, don't let anybody drop your carbs. If somebody drops your carbs, you know, Layne said they're a bad coach. Look, it's all in context, okay? Look, I've had people under 100 grams of carbs. I've had people down to like 50 grams of carbs for short periods of time. You know, if I've got a competitor and they're 2 weeks out, and I think that they can make it to stage, but we really got to kind of sprint to the finish. Look, yeah, I'll drop them down quite a bit. But the difference is, I'm not starting them there. I'm not starting out their contest prep at 1,200 calories a day. That's a short-term thing to kind of try and max out some body fat loss right before a show if we feel like, you know, somebody is going to cut it close. Ideally, you give yourself enough time where that doesn't happen, but, you know, depending on when people come to you, that's not always an option. So yeah, I mean, I've had people down, you know, 50, 60 grams of carbs. Now, I will say there's a certain point I don't go below, and I'll tell people, like, look, this is as far as I'm comfortable going, and I'm not going any further. And either, you know, you're okay with this, or it's time to start reverse dieting, or, you know, they hire somebody else who is okay with starving them. So I think that's an important distinction to make, that kind of we had this reactionary culture. Well, you shouldn't diet for shows, and you should never feel bad, and everything should be, you know, sunshine and rainbows. No, no, that's not the case. Okay, there are certain points where you're going to feel bad. Okay, even if you do everything right. Even I had, you know, and a lot of it's related to body fat levels, even more so than calories. I mean, I've had people, you know, getting ready for shows. I had a gal, Lauren Conlon, who did really well in a couple of shows recently, and she, you know, lowest she ever dropped her carbs was like 170, 150 or 170, like during the most extreme restriction for her. I mean, she consumed more in her contest prep than most women do in the off season, and but she still had days where she didn't feel real great going into train. You know, she was lethargic and that sort of thing, and that's because once you get below your body fat set point, your body is going to start to fight you, and that's regardless of calorie intake. Now, you feel better if you have more calories as opposed to being starved, but you can't necessarily just completely avoid that. So again, that's something important to keep in mind. You know, you do have to restrict, but, you know, it doesn't have to be this extreme. You know, and I'm really trying to, when I do these video logs, I try to get you guys to really kind of focus on the philosophy, the mechanisms, so you can think for yourself. Because, you know, the scientifically lazy thing to do is to take a concept and go to the extreme with it, right? It's scientifically lazy to say, oh, well, you know, some protein is good. Well, let's just have 500 grams per day. No. Scientifically lazy to say, well, you know what, if you overconsume carbs, they're bad, so let's have 0 per day. You know, that's lazy. That's not thinking for yourself. That's not considering an optimal range, okay? So keep that in mind. All right, it's okay. It's okay to sacrifice. It's okay to have some suffering. Are you going to be able to go out to eat, every single day while you're in contest prep because you're doing IIFYM? No, of course not. Okay, you can't. One, because basically restaurants, what they say is in their food and what's actually in it, can be very different from each time you go in, because it's not like they're measuring it out, But if you're in the off season and you want to go out to a restaurant and you can, fit into your numbers, it's probably okay, But if you're 2 weeks out, am I going to tell you, go out and have a big meal at a restaurant? Probably not. Okay, you're going to have to give up that for stage. Okay, but should you have to give that up for the rest of your life? No, absolutely not. So I think those are important differences to understand. The other thing I want to talk about is kind of, I guess I really feel responsible for it. Reactionary of the Metabolic Damage video series. I really want to clarify that, I've said this a few times, but I really don't like the word damage. It's not descriptive of what actually happens. There's no damage to your metabolism. It's not a disease or anything like that. It's just an adaptation, and it's reversible. Now, depending on the length of restriction and how extreme the restriction is, it may take you longer to reverse that adaptation. But what has happened is, unfortunately, people have kind of taken some of the things I said and some of the things other coaches have said that are as good information regarding this, and they see dollar signs, and they see a way to scam people into spending their money. And I've seen these jackasses say anything from, oh, metabolic damage is just, it's caused by a bacteria in your gut, and if you just fix this bacteria, it'll go away. Really? So if it's a bacterial infection, then why aren't people spontaneously getting metabolic adaptation? Well, why don't they just all of a sudden just put on a bunch of weight or have trouble losing body fat? Why isn't the reverse true? Why isn't, after this goes away, why aren't they just all of a sudden just dropping pounds? Okay? That's complete crap. Another one is, coaches will tell people what they want to hear. I lose so many potential clients. Well, not so much anymore, because I just turn them away if they're not willing to listen to me. But, tell people, no, you don't do this show. You need to stop dieting, because we have to reverse diet you in order to fix this adaptation that's occurred, in order to reverse this, okay? And it's going to take a long period of time. Well, that's not what most people want to hear. Most people want to hear, oh yeah, I can fix your metabolic damage and you can still get ready for this show. Listen, metabolic adaptation is caused by long-term caloric restriction, okay? Long-term severe caloric restriction. You are not going to reverse that by continuing to calorically restrict, okay? That's not the way it works. You have to reverse diet, slowly add calories to reverse that. So anybody who's telling you, don't worry, you can drop body fat, we can drop a significant amount of body fat and, and fix your metabolism, you can be sure that they're a snake, all right? And I would not recommend working with them. I do have people that, like, if you start them on a reverse diet and they drop a little bit of body fat, I don't really have a way to explain it. I guess maybe they're getting a metabolic boost, their metabolic rate, kind of speeds back up and they lose a little bit of body fat, but it's really not significant over the course of a long period of time. You're talking about a couple pounds maybe. You have to get them up to a really reasonable calorie level where they're maintaining their weight on a reasonable amount of calories, and then try to calorically restrict them back down so they can lose the amount of body fat they want and get to the level of leanness they want. But it's not something that you're just going to fix in 12 weeks and lose a bunch of body fat. That's nonsense. All right, that's crap. So I guess I really wanted to point that out because I kind of feel responsible for people getting scammed by some of these people. And I've had people email me and say, I watched your video series and I went to somebody who said they were a metabolic damage specialist. I said another thing, if somebody calls themselves a metabolic damage specialist, I think they're probably full of it. The science behind this is, there's quite a bit of data, but the interpretation of that data is still pretty open, and we need more data. So it's one of those things that it's kind of I'm glad a lot of awareness has been brought to it, but at the same time I'm kind of discouraged by how many people have taken it upon themselves to try and scam people, make a quick buck. But I wanted to kind of make you guys aware of this, so that if you go to somebody, maybe you see some of these warning signs. I had a client who I worked with, who she was one of the worst cases I'd ever seen of adaptation, and part of it was one, her metabolic rate was really low, and two, she had developed an eating disorder from years. I mean, like 3 or 4 years of super low calories interspersed with binging. She had developed an eating disorder of binge and purge. And she was, I guess, like dating a guy who was selling supplements. And the supplement guy said, well, if you take these supplements, it'll fix your metabolic damage. And yeah, I mean that's that's crap. I mean, maybe there are some fat burners out there that cause a really mild increase in metabolic rate, but there's nothing that's just gonna totally fix metabolic adaptation, especially for somebody who's had that long of a period of adaptation. So beware people that kind of want to sell you an easy fix, want to sell you a quick fix. It's not the case. Typically the minimum amount of time I see for people to really kind of bring themselves out of this is a minimum of like 3 months of controlled caloric increases, and most times it's longer than that, just depending on the severity of their caloric restriction that they've been under. And I'll say one more thing. This was kind of brought to my attention. I've been hearing it here and there, but there was an article in the UK Muscle and Fitness by Dr. Dan Reardon, and he kind of touched on a lot of this stuff, and a lot of people took it as kind of an anti-metabolic damage article. And we talked, and really what he said was it was kind of reactionary to all the scam artists that have come out and used and bastardized the real science in order to try and make themselves money. And I'm 100% on with that, because I can't stand that. That drives me nuts. Like I said, I feel bad for anybody that's happened to, for people using scare tactics just to try and make a quick buck. I think metabolic adaptation, I don't want to say it's diagnosed, because it's not a disease, but I want to use that term just for the sake of simplicity. I kind of compare it to attention deficit disorder. I was diagnosed with attention deficit disorder when I was a kid, and my mother became a kind of leader of a local chapter of something called CHAD, which is Children and Adults with Attention Deficit Disorder. It's a support group for kids that have it and for adults that have it, and strategies to kind of overcome it. And what Mom dealt with a lot was a lot of people saying, well, this doesn't exist. This is just kids being kids, or kids being hyper. But a lot of people, it was underdiagnosed and overdiagnosed at the same time. Okay, because a lot of people would say, oh, they would just bring a kid in who was just being a kid, just being hyper, and say, my kid's got ADD. Give me some medication, and and so there was kind of reactionary. In the medical community, people saying, ADD doesn't, not that it doesn't exist, but it's, it's so overdiagnosed. But there's also underdiagnosis, because a lot of people would say, well, there's nothing wrong with my kid. There's nothing wrong with my kid. He doesn't have any kind of disorder or anything like that. And so you kind of had both ends of the spectrum, reactionary on both ends. And I think that's kind of what we're dealing with now. Is that you have people that it's overdiagnosed, because I've had people come to me and say, oh, I'm eating 1,800 calories a day, and I'm really having trouble dropping weight, and I'm doing 30 minutes of cardio every other day, am I metabolically damaged? But no, no, you're not. It's not. you're just at a plateau in fat loss, and you probably need to get a little bit more aggressive. And so I've had people that weren't, a lot of people who kind of self-diagnose this as a kind of a I don't want to say scapegoat, but they're always looking for the latest thing, whether it's genetics or whatever, in order to say, oh, that's it, that's why I'm having trouble losing body fat. But at the same time, I think it was also underdiagnosed, because I've talked to so many people who have gone through unbelievable horror stories of long-term caloric restriction, and now they have a lot of trouble dropping body fat. So again, I kind of want to, I don't want to be long-winded here, but I want people to understand that there is a middle ground, and don't be reactionary on either end. Okay, look at everything. Try to be objective. Look at the data, and make decisions for yourself. And don't get caught up in that reactionary on either end. And hopefully that will be helpful for you guys. Again, if you guys have any questions, you can try and contact me. I can't promise anything, but I do my best. You can contact me through my website at BioLayne.com. And for those of you who have been inquiring about coaching, I'm full. I'm taking on very, very few people every month. But if you do email us, we will be more than happy to give you referrals to coaches we trust. And that list is growing every day. I'm very encouraged by that. We really need more good coaches out there because there's just so many bad ones. So it seems like there's a list of growing really good coaches who care about people. But I also am discouraged by kind of the snakes that have come out and tried to use this this awareness to their advantage to make money. So be cautious always if somebody's trying to sell you something. If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. And like my parents said, if it walks like a duck, talks like a duck, it's probably a duck. So I hope this video log's been helpful for you guys, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks a bunch. Appreciate you watching.